Hi everyone, it's Rachel back with the Shades of Orange, and today I'm so excited for this video topic. I am recommending road trip horror and thriller books, also known as road trip books from hell. So these are stories that for the most part take place, at least part of the story, on the road, and I think they are perfect books to read if you're going on vacation or just going on a long road trip yourself. Hopefully you'll get some inspiration here. This is one of my favorite subgenres, and I would love to get more recommendations. If you enjoy these kind of videos, definitely stick around and subscribe. Otherwise, let's get started. First, let's start with a favorite of mine, and that is I'm Thinking of Ending Things by Ian Reid, and this is a very short thriller horror book that follows a couple that are out on the Canadian road. They are traveling to go meet the boyfriend's parents, and we're following the story from the girlfriend's perspective, who is sitting there thinking that, well, maybe she wants to end the relationship. And so most of the story takes place as they are driving to their parents, and then there is a part where they're in the parents' house, and then the story goes from there. I better not give away too much, but I will say that a good portion of the story takes place on the cold, blizzarding Canadian roads and highways. And as a Canadian myself, I definitely recognized that experience, especially driving late at night where it's dark and snowy outside. It's so atmospheric, it's so creepy and unsettling. This book has beautiful prose. I think it's very literary and smart and clever. Some people will recognize where the story is going and be able to guess some of the twists and turns, and regardless of that, I think that this book is just solid from beginning to end. I love it so much. One of my, again, all-time favorites and highly recommended. I read this book honestly when I was sitting at home, but I would love to reread it on a road trip because I've heard really good things about the audiobook version. I'm someone who actually gets really sick when I read in a car. Does anyone else have that experience? But I would love to try the audiobook version and reread it that way on a future road trip, especially if we're traveling sometime in winter. So winter road trip, this is your go-to book. Next up, we have A Black and Endless Sky by Matthew Leones, and this is a horror book that follows a brother and sister that are going on a road trip because the brother is just ending a relationship himself. He is getting divorced, and so his sister is helping him to move, and so they're driving through the desert. So again, this is great if you're going on a road trip in more of a desert setting. And as you would expect, something goes horribly wrong. The woman, the sister, wanders off, and when she comes back, she's possibly different, and the story goes from there. I will admit that the beginning was a slow burn for me. It's very slow paced, and I wasn't entirely sure if I liked the main characters, and so I wasn't entirely sure if I was completely invested in this book, but I stuck it out, and around the halfway point, that's when the story got really, really good for me. This book kind of plays into different themes of like possible survival horror, maybe there's a possession going on, and when a certain character is introduced, I found myself basically cheering for the villain because, again, I never got fully attached to the main characters. Maybe I should have, but I really enjoyed cheering for the bad guy and hoping that things were going to go terribly wrong for the sister and brother. So perhaps I read this book with the wrong intentions, but regardless, I really enjoyed the direction it took towards the end. It got very exciting. The slower paced beginning paid off because from there I found that it had a great climax. It was really exciting and fast paced, and I flew through the second half. So again, if you have the patience for a slower start to a book that has a really good payoff, this is one I definitely would recommend checking out. And again, if you're traveling through somewhere like Arizona in that desert-like setting, I think that this one would be an excellent book to pick up. Then for another winter horror recommendation, I want to mention Nosferatu by Joe Hill, another one of my favorites. This follows a young girl named Vic who has a special ability to find objects that are missing, and she gets tied up or pulled into this greater story involving this villainous character named Charlie Manx. And this entire book is not a road trip book, but a good portion of this book involves Charlie Manx taking away children to what he calls Christmas Land. And so you do have portions of the book where there are children in his Rolls-Royce car, and they're driving away to this imaginary place called Christmas Land. And so again, if you're looking for a horror book to read during the winter months, I absolutely love this one. It's honestly one of my all-time favorite books, and I really think that those scenes are so funny. You have the Christmas tunes playing on the radio, you have this iconic car, so it's very much a major part of the story, even though again it's not the entire book on the road. But I had to mention this book here. It's such an iconic one, and for really good reasons. Honestly, if you are one of the few subscribers who have not yet read this book off my recommendation, please do that this winter. Next up is Lolita, and this is more of a classic thriller that, of course, follows a man who is obsessed with this young girl, and his obsession turns into pedophilia when he actually has some control over the girl's life. And with that, within the story, and something that no one really talks about, is that there is an incredibly creepy major part of this book that involves a road trip. Essentially, he takes this young girl on the road with him, and terrible things ensue. This is a book that I've said before is one that I really underestimated. I tend to have this idea that with classics, they can't be that bad in terms of content because they're old books. And in the old days, apparently in my mind, you just didn't go there in books. But this book definitely goes there. It's not just about obsession, but he actually does act upon his urges. And it is so messed up, so disturbing, and I just could not help myself but feel for the idea of this young girl, which I know the story is based off of real events, which is so messed up to begin with. But imagining being a girl who is under the control of this parental figure who is completely taking advantage of the situation, driving you around the countryside, and just having no autonomy over your life and body. Just messed up book. So less of a fun road trip book, but if you want a really compelling story that does take place on the road, or at least a good chunk of the book takes place on the road. And so if you're looking for that, this is one you may want to try as well. Then we have Perfect Days by Rafael Montes, and this is a horror thriller book that is translated from Brazil, where the author is from, and we follow a young man who is obsessed with a young girl, and when she turns down his advances, he decides to kidnap her, and through the story, he decides to go on this road trip with her around Brazil in order to basically inspire her to write, because she is a writer, and so he has this whole thing planned out, and they drive along the countryside, and of course terrible things ensue. This book is definitely misery inspired, but again, I like that unlike Misery, which is very claustrophobic, this book again has a lot more movement. At first he kidnaps her and he still keeps her hostage, but they actually move around and you get to kind of see different parts of the country, and it's just a country that honestly I haven't seen much of myself. I've never traveled there, so I really enjoy this book because it takes a lot of tropes and stories that I've read before, but it makes it feel very fresh. The main character is very deadpan. He is a fantastic sociopath because he's just so flat and terrifying because of that. And I do have to say, huge content warnings for body horror. This one gets really gruesome and dark and really messed up. So if you enjoy my taste for disturbing books, this is one you might want to check out as well. And I also want to talk about Road of Bones by Christopher Golden, which is a book that is inspired by true events. There is a road in Russia that is nicknamed or called the Road of Bones because when it was made, so many people who were responsible for building the road died along the way, and their bodies were simply buried under the road itself. And so that was the author's inspiration, essentially following the story in the modern day where we have people that are driving along on that road, and as you would expect, terrible things ensue. I will admit that this is not my favorite of some of the books that I'm going to talk about in this video. I thought that this one was fine, but I didn't really connect with the characters. I didn't completely love the story, and I did have some gripes about the way that they drove on the road, particularly with ice. I just don't think that the author has a lot of experience driving on ice, so I didn't entirely love this one. But if you're looking for, again, winter-based driving horror, this is one you may want to check out for yourself. It was good, but it was a little bit predictable, just not my favorite. I think that there's better ones out there, but it's still a recommendation. Then I'm going to reluctantly mention Survive the Night by Riley Sager, and this is a thriller that you kind of need to talk about if you're going to talk about road trip horror and thrillers, but I don't think it's actually the best one. Basically, we follow this young woman who is wanting to go back home. She has been away at college, but something happened to her best friend. She died due to the campus serial killer, and so she agrees to get a ride with a man who's offering a ride share, and so they go in the night. Of course, she starts to wonder, well, maybe this man that she doesn't know is possibly the serial killer himself. This book has a really intriguing setup, and it does have some fun suspenseful moments, especially towards the beginning as she starts to realize more and more about this individual. But there's some twists and turns that I really don't like in this book. They really grate at me, and I just have some problems with it. So I've actually done a whole spoiler-filled discussion. If you've read it, you can check it out. But while I don't think it's a great book, again, it's a book that is road trip horror, and you might still want to check it out for yourself, despite my warning that I don't think it's very good. So keep it all in mind, decide for yourself, and let me know down below. Last, I want to talk about Under the Skin by Michelle Faber, and this is a story that follows a woman who drives along the Scottish Highlands, picking up hitchhikers and taking them away for her own nefarious purposes. This is a book that I really encourage you to go in as blind as possible if you haven't been spoiled by the movie. And this is actually a book I've done a whole separate review on, so if I remember, I'll link it down below. But essentially, this is a really creepy book that is not quite what it seems. It's a thriller, but there is more to it. And again, you just got to try it for yourself. If you're looking for something that is literary and smart and topical and deals with some really interesting thematic elements, then this is one you definitely want to check out. Again, I feel like so many people have seen the movie, which I still need to watch, but I've heard is great. And despite that, I do think that you should go back and enjoy the original story. And yeah, if you want road trip horror, this is it. You know, the idea of a woman taking men away in her car, and you get to find out what happens to them. Well, it's pretty horrifying. So I will leave it there and let you decide for yourself if you decide to read it. So that's it for this video here. I'd love to hear of the books I talked about. Which ones are you planning on checking out? As well as I'd love for you to recommend me your favorite road trip horror or thriller book. I really enjoy this genre and I'd love to read more. I'd love to do a follow-up video to this. If you're new to my channel, if you want to consider subscribing, I do read a lot of horror and thrillers as well as adult science fiction and fantasy. You could help me out by sharing this video around online, dropping a little emoji, even if it's just a little car or a truck, that would be great. And if you want to hit that little notification bell, you'll never miss a video from me. Thanks so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.